The emergency room doors burst open at 2:47 a.m., and Sarah Chen barely looked up from the sobbing child in her arms. After 16 hours on her feet, the pediatric nurse had learned to tune out the chaos, until she heard a man's panicked voice cutting through the fluorescent-lit haze. "Please, someone help! My daughter, she can't breathe!" Sarah's head snapped up. A man in an expensive suit, now rumpled and stained, stumbled through the entrance carrying a little girl whose lips were turning blue. The triage nurse was on a call. The attending physician was in surgery. Without thinking, Sarah thrust the crying toddler she'd been comforting into the arms of a startled intern and sprinted toward them. "Give her to me," Sarah commanded, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The man's eyes, wild with terror, met hers for just a second before he released his daughter into her arms. The girl couldn't have been more than 5, her small body convulsing as she struggled for air. Sarah's training kicked in like muscle memory. Allergic reaction, severe. She could see the swelling, recognized the anaphylaxis. "When did this start?" she demanded, already moving toward the nearest examination room. 10 minutes ago. We were at a restaurant. She ate something with peanuts. Her EpiPen, I couldn't find it in time. I drove as fast as I could," his voice cracked. Sarah was already calling for emergency medications, her fingers checking the girl's pulse while barking orders to the staff now flooding the room. The next 20 minutes blurred into a symphony of controlled urgency. Epinephrine, antihistamines, oxygen. Sarah never left the little girl's side, her hand stroking the child's hair, whispering reassurances even as she monitored every vital sign with laser focus. When the girl's breathing finally steadied and color returned to her cheeks, Sarah allowed herself to exhale. The man had been standing in the corner the entire time, his hands pressed against the wall as if it were the only thing holding him up. Now he slid down to the floor, his face buried in his hands. Sarah approached quietly and knelt beside him. "She's going to be okay," she said softly. "You got her here in time." He looked up and Sarah saw tears streaming down his face. "I almost lost her. I almost lost Emma. She's all I have left." "But you didn't lose her," Sarah said firmly. "You're a good father. You did everything right." The man, who later introduced himself as James Montgomery, stayed with his daughter through the night. Sarah checked on them during her rounds, bringing Emma a stuffed bear from the pediatric ward's donation box and James a cup of terrible hospital coffee. They talked in whispers while Emma slept. And Sarah learned that James had lost his wife 2 years earlier to cancer. Emma was his entire world, and tonight had been his worst nightmare come to life. Before he left the next morning, James gripped Sarah's hand. "You saved her life. I don't know how to thank you. Just take care of that beautiful girl," Sarah had replied, smiling. "That's all the thanks I need." She never expected to see him again. 3 years passed. Sarah continued working at City General Hospital, picking up extra shifts to pay off her nursing school loans and help support her younger brother through college. She lived in a cramped studio apartment in a neighborhood that made her mother worry, but it was all she could afford. Every dollar mattered. When you were sending half your paycheck across the country to keep your brother in his dorm room, life had a rhythm, exhausting but purposeful. Until the day everything fell apart. It started with a phone call from an unknown number. A clipped voice informed her that she was being sued for medical malpractice. A patient from 8 months ago claimed Sarah had administered the wrong medication during an emergency procedure, causing permanent complications. The claim was false. Sarah knew it was false, but the lawsuit was real, and the legal fees would be catastrophic. Her hands shook as she hung up the phone. Even with the hospital's legal support, she'd need her own attorney. The costs would destroy her financially. Worse, the stress of the investigation meant she was placed on temporary leave pending review. No work meant no paycheck. No paycheck meant no way to help her brother, no way to pay rent, no way to survive. Within 2 weeks, Sarah's carefully constructed life began to crumble. Her landlord issued an eviction notice. Her brother called, voice tight with worry, saying he might need to drop out. Sarah sat in her apartment surrounded by boxes, trying not to cry, trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong so fast. She was contemplating sleeping in her car when her phone rang. Another unknown number. She almost didn't answer. "Sarah Chen?" The voice was male. Familiar somehow, though she couldn't place it. "Yes?" This is James Montgomery. I don't know if you remember me. Sarah's breath caught. Emma, the little girl with the allergic reaction. Of course I remember. I need to see you. Today, if possible. It's important. Something in his tone made her agree. They met at a coffee shop near the hospital. James looked different than she remembered, more polished, more commanding, though his eyes still held that same warmth from the night in the ER. I heard about the lawsuit, he said without preamble. I have connections at City General. When I learned what was happening to you, I had to reach out. Sarah stiffened. I don't need pity. It's not pity, James said quietly. It's gratitude. You saved my daughter's life 3 years ago. You asked for nothing in return. Now you're being destroyed by a system that should be protecting you. And I won't stand by and watch. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents, legal documents. Sarah's eyes widened as she scanned them. I've retained the best medical malpractice defense team in the state to represent you, James explained. All fees paid. I've also reviewed the case. The patient who's suing you? He has a history of fraudulent claims. My investigators found evidence that will destroy his credibility. James, I can't accept. You can and you will. His voice was gentle but firm. Sarah, do you know what I do for a living? I'm the CEO of Montgomery Technologies. That night in the ER, I was coming from a board meeting. I had a driver, security, everything. But when Emma couldn't breathe, none of that mattered. I grabbed her and ran because I was a father first. And you didn't see a CEO or a wealthy man. You saw a scared dad and a dying child, and you saved her without hesitation. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I was just doing my job. You were being human, James corrected. In a world where people walk past suffering every day, you ran toward it. That kind of goodness is rare. And when I learned you were losing everything for doing your job with integrity, he shook his head. You saved me once. You saved Emma, which means you saved my reason for living. Now it's my turn to protect you. The lawsuit was dismissed within a month. The patient's credibility indeed crumbled under scrutiny, and Sarah's record was completely cleared. But James didn't stop there. He'd learned about her brother's situation, about her struggle to make ends meet despite working herself to exhaustion. Montgomery Technologies is opening a corporate wellness center, he told her, during one of their increasingly frequent coffee meetings. We need a director of nursing, someone who understands that healthcare isn't just about procedures, it's about humanity. The position comes with a salary that's triple what you're making now, full benefits and a signing bonus that should handle your brother's tuition for the rest of his degree. Sarah stared at him, speechless. Why are you doing all this? James smiled, and suddenly she saw 8-year-old Emma in his expression. The same joy, the same light. Because that night in the ER, you taught me something. You showed me that the best people in this world don't help others because they expect something in return. They do it because it's who they are. And those people? They deserve to be protected, supported, and celebrated. He paused, his voice growing softer. You gave me my daughter's future. Let me give you yours. 6 months later, Sarah stood in Montgomery Technologies' state-of-the-art wellness center, watching her brother graduate via video call on her lunch break. Her new team surrounded her, a group of caregivers she'd handpicked who shared her philosophy, that healing begins with seeing people, not just patients. Emma sometimes visited after school, bounding through the center with her EpiPens safely secured in a medical alert backpack. She'd attached herself to Sarah like an honorary aunt, and Sarah loved every minute of it. James would watch them together with an expression Sarah had learned to recognize, gratitude mixed with something deeper, something that made her heart skip. You know, James said one evening as they locked up the center together, Emma skipping ahead of them toward the car, I spent 2 years after my wife died thinking the world was just loss and pain. Then you showed me it could also be grace and second chances. Sarah took his hand, the gesture feeling natural now, feeling right. You saved me too, you know, when I needed it most. Then I guess we're even, James said, smiling. 2 people who found each other in the worst moment and discovered the best in humanity. Emma called back to them, impatient and joyful and alive. And as Sarah watched this little girl, this miracle she'd helped, save twirl under the streetlights, She understood something profound. Kindness was never wasted. Every act of goodness rippled outward in ways you couldn't predict, couldn't measure, couldn't control. You just had to trust that saving someone might also mean saving yourself.